ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure to have you watching us on Tete-a-Tete, and I'm joined by a dazzling panel, people with great personal life experiences and a lot of social and political and cultural experience based on what they do. Today, we're going to ask the question, can Africa project her voice on the world stage? And if so, how? And before we do that, I just wanted to give a context for why this idea came up as a program discussion point. Essentially, we're heading towards a world in which events of the last 2 years, and some say a longer period, have led to the increasing centralization of power in the hands of governments and some unelected institutions like the World Health Organization. Now, this has led to the loss of human rights, many of us thought immutable, and has been justified as being for the wider good. So, loss of bodily autonomy, the mandating of medical treatments, and personal digital IDs, which are often a first step towards social monitoring and social scoring, have appeared. Lockdowns, huge rises in the cost of living owing to carbon reduction treaties, and massive censorship typified by the UK's online safety bill have all appeared. This bill includes a clause which says government may ban material which is legal, but in their opinion, harmful to society. Now, there are fears that we're heading towards ever-increasing centralization of power and the creation of a kind of global state which would dramatically affect all our rights as citizens wherever we live. This is the context within which we ask the question, can Africa project its voice on the world stage, or will she become an order taker, following the determinations of governments and citizens in Europe, America, and the global north? I'm joined for their insights on this by Chioma Phillips from Kenya, editor of current affairs magazine Mzingi Africa and broadcaster, Anna Katama, Ugandan-born educator and homeopath, founder of African Experience, which provides workshops for schools celebrating African culture. Dean Okai is a retail entrepreneur, designer, and video producer who has always mentored young people through his career. Now, he founded ADPAC CIC, that's a community interest company, to promote the social, economic, and political welfare of British African and African Caribbean people. Dalian Adofo, last but not least, is a career educator with 15 years frontline teaching experience, a published research fellow and co-director of Ancestral Voices, which is advocating for African cultural and traditional affairs. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us. How are we all?
Fantastic.
Very well, thank you.
It's another blistering day in London. Indoors, it's 27 degrees. So thank God this jacket is only made of cotton. I think that Dean and Dalian did it very well. And next time I shall take a leaf out of your book. So, guys, what do we make of this subject? Is Africa going to be an order taker from the rest of the world? Very quickly, round the whole group. Who's going to start? Anna, we'll start with you.
Okay, I think there's lots of good news here. Because if you look at education, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So if you look at the education system, certainly I can look at it from the UK. And over the 15, 20 years of young people kind of going through the system,
right,
there has been a focus on looking globally and trying to empower young people to see themselves from wherever they're coming from.
Okay.
Enter Africa Experience. So this is what we've been doing, going into schools, empowering them, affirming these young people. To say, look, this is what I am. I'm proud of it. And then the others on the other side, looking and respecting it. So this has come from the early stages. And now as I'm seeing, I've got older kids now, very empowered, very positive. Whatever they're going through, they're willing to go out there. You remember with the George Floyd situation, Black Lives Matter, no COVID could hold them back. So many black streets, many basically African immigrants went out on those streets, very empowered. So you're seeing that coming through. So that gives me the hope that we're going to go into very positive places. It doesn't matter what happens with governments, etc., because we still have all these new technologies which these young people can actually teach us.
Right.
So
I'm
I
going to
am
go
positive.
straight. Fantastic. Look, I'm going to go to Chioma. Chioma Phillips is coming from Nairobi in Kenya. Chioma, is Africa going to be an order taker, or do you think that we will be able to project our voice?
I would probably say, is Africa going to stop being an order taker? Because currently Africa is nothing but an order taker. If you look at the issues that are going on, for instance, in Kenya, where every single time the government wants to get a loan from the IMF will step in, or the World Bank will then step in and begin to dictate issues of policy. Who are you going to hire? Who are you going to fire? What are you going to do in your schools? What are you going to do in your towns, in your cities? How are you going to run your capital? Who are you going to get rid of? Because, this particular governor is not PR friendly, and you need to bring in someone else who can facilitate our discussions and so on. And so currently, Africa is an order taker. Africa does not have the kind of freedom that we have claimed to have, or that others have claimed they gave us. If you look at the African Union is so dependent on aid that all it does is initiate programs or run programs that are funded by foreign governments the way that they want them funded. So it's not really a state of liberty that you will see on the ground. But like Anna said, yes, there is hope, because when you look at the young men and women in Nigeria who went to the streets during EndSARS, and the way that they're running things for Peter Obi, you can see that there's a rumbling of something beautiful taking place on the continent. And like she says, it is external to the government, and that is exactly what we need.
Superb. I'm going to move right on now to Dean. Dean, this must be your line of country. Is Africa able to project her voice on the world stage?
I'm very much in agreement with what Chioma said before me. Africa, to be fair, is exactly the same as all other countries. All countries are order takers, and I don't think any of us should be under any misconception as to the power that is gathered in the World Economic Forum and non-governmental organizations of that nature that align who? Philanthropists, multi-billionaires, business people, highly influential advocates, and then people who have served the Rockefellers and people of this nature for decades. So it's just that Europeans like this trick with the candle where you put it out with your finger. The key is to pretend that it doesn't burn whilst you hold the flame. You just smile pleasantly. And that's what Europeans are better at doing than Africans or anybody else on the planet. So once we understand the nature of the non-governmental organizations, and this is where the influence of the globe is going, we are tasked with creating these same NGOs who are highly influential globally, not only in the continent, but in Europe, Asia, and everywhere else, with our money and our agenda to suit the beneficial outcomes of our people. Now, they're doing it for a meritocracy. However, ours is to create this for the mainstream. And part of that is to know that we're going into an era of blockchain where everything is going to be centralized. And unless we establish highly powerful, globally capable blockchains from now, whilst we're still free, and a decentralized currency that we can take in our wallets, then we're going to be utterly under the control of centralized banking digital currencies. And that includes cross-border payments and every single transaction that we make. So if we want to make a noise on the world stage, it will be from outside government that is highly influential towards government.
Superb. Over to you, Dalian. What do you make of the situation as we stand? Is Africa an order taker, or can she project her voice on the world stage?
Africa can always project its voice on the world stage. Africa has been projecting her voice on the world stage, but through I will call proxy actors, because the very idea of Africa itself, let's not forget, is a European conception. Africans were not given the opportunity to present to them to the world what their vision, their identity of themselves is. So the very idea of Africa is a European idea, and as we know, it's just a place for resource extraction, right? So Africa can be a voice on the world stage, but that will depend on the agency of Africans themselves in what changes they would like to see in their societies and what the nature of that change will involve. You know, notwithstanding or not forgetting the very fact that Africa almost exists as a place of commerce for Europe. You know, it's just a place where things are being drawn. So how can Africans envisage themselves as a place where they have autonomy in making life-defining and life-changing decisions, which will benefit they themselves and their citizens first?
Okay.
Yeah, that's basically the short.
Well, you know, I mean, this is a good roundup of what the situation is. In fact, this is what's motivated me to set up, you know, kind of the channel that I call Renaissance TV and Renaissance Africa on Facebook. And with the idea that Africans need to redefine who they are in their own terms and reimagine the future they feel is fit and suitable for them. But I want us to continue this conversation in two strands. The first part, I want to look at what I'm calling the soft issues, attitudinal issues. You know, it was said, for example, by this behaviorist called Maslow, and I'm going to share my screen very briefly with you. Where are we? Okay, I'm going to share that. Can you see this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so basically Maslow was saying that there are deficiency needs and there are growth needs. And he was saying that there was a hierarchy of these needs. Now, it's not necessary that, first of all, you know, you move from physiological to safety to love and belonging needs to esteem needs to self-actualization needs. But generally speaking, what he's saying is that if your physiological needs, for example, for air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction, the very basic needs, if those basic needs aren't met, your whole focus of attention goes onto meeting those needs. So in that case, all this wonderful stuff that you erudite people are talking about, which are far more about things like self-actualization, self-esteem, like respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, freedom, and in terms of self-actualization, where you're talking, this is the one on the top here, you're talking about the desire to become the most that one can be. Of course, we are sitting in the studio and talking about these things, but the reality is that for a lot of people, their physiological, very basic needs aren't being met. I want to have a look at this. Do you think that the amount of firefighting that Africans do across the continent, 1.3 billion people in 55 countries, do you think that the amount of firefighting leaves the bandwidth for people to be thinking about the issues even that we are talking about today?
Can I start?
Yeah.
Anybody?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I was thinking, because I was looking at that
Yeah.
Maslow and thinking,
Hierarchy.
okay, it's the hierarchy, and realizing,
Right.
yes, of course, the majority of people are struggling. We're all with all these COVID things that we've gone through.
Mhm.
Actually, there is this thing as well, this idea that there is these tectonic plates moving, shifting things.
Mhm.
So if you can dare to raise your head up, there is a big space and great opportunities if you've got that kind of entrepreneurial push inside of you. However, there is fear. And I think a lot of people in power are using fear
Mhm.
to keep people under control, because then it's easier to manage, because all we want is security at the base. You really want to feed your kids. You want to make sure, particularly in Africa, the education is expensive. You've got to get school fees and all these things. So you're right. I think the majority of people, we're all kind of down, dipping down under the radar, just trying to struggle and keep going.
Okay. Okay.
However, can I just say the last bit I just wanted to say?
Please go.
The bit I wanted to say is this idea that it doesn't take a lot of people really to change things. Apparently, it only takes 20% to agitate and change and influence in order to bring about 80% change. Okay, so I still believe once this, whatever happens, this cat and mouse will keep going with the global powers trying to control social media, trying to control people, reminding them about how they just need to have security and all that. But there will be these agitators that will still be cropping up and hopefully leading and being heard. While before it was impossible to be heard because you needed to speak to so-and-so and so-and-so's brother and so-and-so's aunt in order to get to the president.
Right.
Now we have this social media where you don't even need to speak to your own president. You could cross boundaries and go to another country. So there's that there, which can be seen as dangerous.
Well, we're doing that to a degree. We're doing that now. I'm going to go to Chioma. Chioma, the issue about firefighting and the fact that, look, you need clean water, you need energy, you need health services. If these fundamentals aren't met, you're very focused on this. And one of the things that Maslow actually said also was that the longer these needs are unmet, the more they become almost a fetish for the person, that they are so heavily focused on this. Now, are we able to get our folk to, as Dean was saying earlier, to be able to snuff that candle and smile, to be able to look beyond the pain of where they are and still aspire to something? Is it possible?
Yes, I think that people don't actually stop aspiring to become greater. I think what happens is that there's a general frustration that begins to build up within the people and within the system, within the environment, the community, about not being able to do as much as they know that they can. And if we talk about physiological needs trumping everything else, what then would we do with things like the Mau Mau movement, which was actually the trigger not just for independence in Kenya, but independence in Africa, where people said to themselves, see, these people came and took our land, and we don't want this situation to prevail any longer. We're done. We're taking the fight to them. And so in Kenya, what happened is that the Kikuyus went to the forest and said, this is do or die. Let's all swear an oath that we're going to do everything that we can to bring down the oppressor. They were being tortured. They're being kept in concentration camps. The things were ringed around with spikes, dug into pits in the ground. If you tried to escape, you would die. They came and, they locked you up and they told you when you could go out to look for food, when you couldn't. It was bad. Now, if they remained focused on, I just need to eat and then I will see another day, nothing would have moved. But because a bunch of people said, and this must be the 20% that Anna is speaking about, they said, no, if we're going to die, let's just die with some measure of dignity.
Yeah.
And we can do more. We can try and get our land back. And so they stood up and they faced off against these guys. I'm learning in recent years that they actually made guns and were shooting down planes, but this is not in the history that is, commonly spread around in education. And so I believe that what it takes is actually just a mindset shift to see that if you're controlled by your physical needs, you will never actually push beyond to achieve your ultimate in life. And you'll just keep yourself in this little box thinking all I am is somebody who must consume. And that's it. But if we can encourage people to see that, no, food is not your master. You can do without food for ages. And I think that's why stories about people who fasted for, I don't know how many 100 days, leak out every now and then. It's so that people can think about it. If you can see beyond physical needs, to realize that achieving your destiny, achieving your ultimate best is the goal of why you're here, then what will happen is it changes the fight, it changes the struggle, it changes the conversation. That's my point of view.
Okay, that's Dean. I noticed you nodding quite strongly on that. What do you have to say about this? Is that, I mean, it's a tough situation. The candle burns you when you grab it, but it's the only way you snuff it out. It's like you got a broken leg, so you can't say I'm not going to the hospital. It's because you got a broken leg. You got to get to the hospital. What you know? What's your particularly? How do we get people to kind of crest that mountain of, oh, this is too much for me, and you know I'm constantly under the cosh and so on and so forth, and say, as Chioma said, for the Mau Mau, literally.
I literally fully concur with Anna and Chioma, and here is where it lies. It is mindset. How long can you accept a condition before you're sick and tired of being sick and tired? Now, you mentioned a very important aspect of our psychologies when we've been suffering long enough, in that we become completely focused on the problem at hand. And this is why revolutionaries have always been led by those who were slightly more educated. If you look at Che Guevara in Cuba, these people weren't working class who led the revolution. They were educated to know that the condition should be better. So when I speak about creating these non-governmental agencies that can create the kind of philanthropy that Bill Gates would be seen to be providing, although he's actually sowing his agenda, and that people become more malleable through the optics, we have clean energy batteries that are created with sand. We don't have to rely on power grids. You can deliver these clean energy batteries anywhere in the most rural of areas where they'd have full electricity. They're manufactured by and large of sand. You have water generating machines that can take the moisture from the air to provide clean water for people to drink. So the solutions are there. It's merely the implementation of the solutions. And for that, you have to have the agency, as Dalian was saying, and the desire by employing those qualified skills to put these resources on the ground. So when you're looking at Maslow's hierarchy, we can't look at the general public any more than we can for English people whose children are starving now, who a professional footballer who to older men would be seen as a youth, who did more to make people's children eat than the government. So as I said,
Marcus Rashford.
Yeah. So when I talk about Britain and America, it's like a very attractive blonde lady in a brand new dress with feces in her underwear, dancing around. The closer you get to the smell. And you see, the whole thing was an illusion. And what they built that pretty blonde lady in her brand new dress to be from far. So once we're aware that the Wizard of Oz is merely this old man behind a projector, and this is all they have, are their movies and music that propagate us to believe that there's something far greater than they were. When you look at America and you look at what happened in January 6th, you can see America isn't what it purports to be in terms of its security and its control of the people. So all we need to understand is that our security, and when I say security, our intelligence agencies must grow at the same rate as our economics and our influence. I think the people will be far better protected. And there's no better demonstration of this than the synthetically created state of Israel by Britain, in that they grew their security at the same rate as their influence and their economics. And thereby, they're able to protect their state way beyond their 99-year lease, which Britain acquired on their behalf.
This is great, and it leads me to a question. I'm going to put it to Dalian, but it's actually one of my favorite bugbears, so I'm probably going to come back over to the rest of you. Dalian, Dean said something about Ernesto Che Guevara. He was a medical person. Was he a dentist or a doctor or something?
Doctor.
He was a doctor. So these people weren't kind of from the streets, and these were kind of middle class
Working
people.
class, underclass, yeah.
Okay, now here's my problem. In Africa at the moment, for whatever reason, whether it's colonialism or whatever, there is a shocking disappointment, and please come back at me if I'm being too harsh. There's a shocking disappointment in the middle classes who seem to have very little conception of the idea of noblesse oblige. Noblesse oblige basically means to whom much is given, whether it's education, resources, this, much is expected. Rather, the middle classes seem to want to ape and pretend to be people who come from far bigger economies and follow them in their ways, and means. So, how are we going to trigger this thing within our community so that those of you, some of you guys have got 2 degrees and stuff, and it just so happens that you have actually, kind of grasped the nettle to go kind of onto the front line. How do we get a wider kind of acknowledgement and acceptance of this idea that, okay, I was blessed with stuff, and so to a degree, I need to give stuff back to my community? What's your solution?
Well, I don't know how many questions are in that one question, Ted, but,
Sorry, you drew the short straw.
I'm gonna do my very best. There's at least 5 in there, but I think it still segues nicely into the discussion that the other panel members have so expertly and I would say very succinctly described, because we're following the same trend here. And and where I'll start off with, because Maslow, we know Maslow well in education. It's one of the building blocks of how you construe your learning environment, and the thing I'm going to say is this, right? We have to wonder why, for instance, Africa has so much arable land, but all of the commerce from this agribusiness goes to do what? Fill a Western plate. So that means even the very nature of commerce being generated within every single African country is not to meet the needs of its people, but what is it to do? Is to just continue the colonial extraction of things. So thereby, what do you think the middle class too will be doing? They will also be continuing, because they are part of an idea that has been left from over 600 years ago, which is you're only here to ape the European or the white man, which is another synonym for it. And when you're talking about, for instance, your physiological needs, where we're talking about food, basic food, there's that adage of I think it was Biko is accredited with a few people. If your stomach belongs to your enemy, then in a sense you will never be liberated, because the only thing you're thinking of is food. Food as a basic should we say conception to survival shouldn't be your first and most urgent need. That means, as Dean has said, you're missing out the whole bigger picture. And from what all the others said, we identified issues as well as the solutions. And I particularly love Dean's solution of the NGOs. Because in a sense, what we start to do is we fight fire with fire. It's not always we need to reinvent a wheel, but we can take the best out of a particular wheel and let it work for our particular needs. Yes. So for instance, again, I'll use Ghana because that's where I'm from and that's what I know as fact. Whereas the farmers are not growing to meet the food needs of the people, there's also the extra element for us to think of the fact that there are these other NGOs, and the Gates Foundation being one of them, which have at least over 10 years now, since President Kufuor, have been able to grow genetically modified foods to feed the Ghanaian population, right? So there are people in Ghana who eat GMO food and don't even know the difference, right? And I have to call out this organization. They're called Food Sovereignty, and they've been taking the Ghanaian government to court again over 10 years now. So even as you're thinking of food, you also have to think of how safe your food is, because there's already another body separate from government that is manipulating and interfering with, even if that food is going to sustain you or is going to create conditions of illness that would then allow you to become dependent on some other European pharmaceutical company. So again, I go back to my point at the beginning, that we have to understand that Africa, as we know it now, is an idea of the Europeans. Africans haven't really had the opportunity, and when they have tried, it's ended in very morbid ways. Lumumba and Nkrumah being examples. So again, this is where Dean's point of security becomes very apt. Africa cannot develop along one single line. there has to be multiple things going on because we are besieged by multiple problems. Do you understand? And I'll even take to Sister Chioma when she mentions the Mau Mau rebellion, because according to the historical record as we have it, those liberation fighters never even called themselves Mau Mau. That is a British term the British invented to describe that movement. So again, if we're describing ourselves by European conceptions, then we don't really, again, know ourselves. So to kind of bring this all back and tie it down to your question, Uncle Ted, this is where we go. The only reason the African middle class will still be propagating such madness, rather than understanding that the society, for a society to grow, it has to feed itself. So those who are more knowledgeable have to find ways to give back that knowledge to empower the middle, or should we say the lower or under or no class at all. In Africa, that doesn't happen. We see a lot of corruption because, for instance, like in the West, when prime ministers and presidents resign, there's a lifelong package of benefits, perks that supports them. And African
speaking engagements, which they make 10 times what they did as prime minister.
Right. The same doesn't exist in Africa. So they know the minute you leave office, you're either going to become acutely broke, because there's no social infrastructure to support you. So what will this facilitate? It will facilitate you setting up particular enterprises that will allow you to basically, again, extract those financial resources. So you see, we're becoming that's how it was designed, for us to become microcosms of European systems. So until we can find ways to redefine ourselves within our current paradigm, we just kind of continue it. It becomes the oppressed becoming the oppressor and what.
Dalian, thank you. I mean, you answered 5 questions and added maybe 4 of a couple of others. I'm going to go now to Chioma with another one of my little bugbears. Is that, you see, let's bring her on. Okay, Chioma, I actually only know bright people. All my African friends are incredibly intelligent, mostly very well educated, mostly very well traveled. And when they talk in whispers behind closed doors to each other. And they discuss these issues, ad nauseam. Put the same person out in the public arena. Now, Dean runs a community interest company, and he is forced to stand up in public in places where the media are and so on and so forth, and speak up. Why is it that particularly these erudite, over-educated, over-traveled, usually not poor people, why are they silent in public, Chioma?
Because that's how they've been trained. There is nothing about the education system that was given to Africans or some of the colonies of France or Britain or whoever that was actually designed to set the mind free. It was designed to create mindsets that were willing to obey and to toe the line and to stay within the boundaries of what is considered acceptable, whether or not you're exploding on the inside. And so what they did was they said, yes, okay, fine, I'll toe the line. Some of them believe that actually what they're doing is good. I've been interacting with some of the older people who were around during the time of the transition from colonialism to this fake independence that, has been bandied around. And they just, they were told, yes, my apologies. The Mau Mau are actually the Kenya Land and Freedom Army. So they were told that the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army were terrorists. And so they believe these are terrorists, do not associate with them. So when they went abroad and studied and they came back, they were interviewed by the colonial government. And they were asked, are you in any way, shape or form involved with, now the British were calling them Mau Mau because it was a derogatory term. Are you in any way, shape or form, associated with them? Are you affiliated with them? Do you support their cause? Yes or no? And if you said yes, you're not employable by government. So you have to say no, so that you stay, You stay within this safe little box so that you can earn a living, so that you can feed your family, and so that you can be called good boy or good girl in whatever term that would be, because, it came by promotions, or, you're assigned a role here, or some status, or some medal, or something or the other. There is nothing about the structure of the colonial government that was designed to free people. It was all designed to create people who would comply with the extraction industry that Africa was meant to become.
Okay.
So what you see are people who just want to maintain the status quo. And if they see people who are kind of like questioning and trying to color outside of the boundaries, they will come at them to destroy them. Because what's going to happen is, if they challenge the system, they're challenging this person's comfort.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much. I'm going to come to Anna, and then after that, perhaps Dean would like to share a couple of words on this matter. So, Anna, basically, you go from pet to threat in about 2 nanoseconds. The moment you change your perspective, like you come back, you've been educated, and the government says you have any sympathies to the Mau Mau, and you say, well, actually, I think it's a good cause. That's it. That's the end of your career. I mean, you got educated literally for nothing because you become unemployable. So how do we manage this idea? Because there are so many Black people, certainly here in the United Kingdom, if I step outside of Africa for a moment, who are constantly acting to seek the validation of, what would you call them? Their feudal lords, their sponsors. They just want a pat on the head. How do we address this thing? Anna, to you.
I think, as I said before, literally it comes back to education. And Chioma was also mentioning the same thing. It's that problem that we have, that our education system, many of us, even when we were studying, I'm Ugandan, when we were in Uganda, it was a very narrow, actually, Eurocentric education. And it literally traps you in your mind. So even the African diaspora that's here, it's that idea that we have nothing that we can offer from our own cultures, but we are here to learn from others. And yet all this richness we haven't explored, or we've started exploring. I think that's why I feel quite positive, because there is this feeling that more and more people are doing that now and saying, no, actually, there is more to it. And the systems that have been shown that have been the status quo actually are failing. We've seen it particularly recently with COVID, and how all the various systems were really struggling. Or actually, one of the best examples, which has, even though it's a negative, the COVID is quite a negative situation that took place, but it's awoken up. If it doesn't awake the leadership up, it's a shame. They couldn't get on a flight from Kenya, Uganda, wherever, to go to Germany to get healing. Suddenly, they were faced with a health system that just didn't work. Why? Because it's not fit for purpose. Why? Because they've just been bleeding it. But that's the same with the education system, where you're all the time looking for a donor. We are looking for a donor, or somebody apparently expert who's come and explained to us how to do things. And yet we have the things. We need to look inside ourselves. And for example, in Uganda, we had a professor who's been looking at certain herbs that he saw his mother using, and then he came up with this wonderful herbal thing that had saved so many lives in Uganda. But oh my gosh, are you sure? Suddenly there was all these people coming saying it's not been researched. So obviously it's been put through quite a lot of research now, which is all positive. But the narrative tends to be from a European angle coming and imposed on us. But what has been positive is recently all these things have been seen not to work. The American system, the British system at the moment, the European Union as well. So this is a great opportunity, and
Okay,
that's why.
perfect. I'm going to flip this to Dean right now, because he's a man with a lot of experience in the whole kind of social education sector via mentoring. So how do we flip that mindset, Dean, practically, in practical everyday terms? the people who are very, very, very well educated, but actually their mindset actually really suits them only for perpetuating the problems that we have.
We aren't exposing ourselves to the psychological and spiritual repair that we deserve. So when we look at reparations, there is an economic component and there's a psychological and spiritual component. So as we lobby governments, families and corporations who were involved in the African Holocaust, that is one component. And as you say, people who are focused on their direct needs to eat and clothe their families are very heavily focused on that economic component. But the one component that we can actually control, there's very little conversation around and there's very little impact made within, which is the psychological and spiritual reparations. Yes. Now, Dalion and Sister V are doing their part through Ancestral Voices, and you've got others doing it through their spiritual organizations. But as we come closer to creating curriculums that are specifically for African and African diaspora, psychological and spiritual repair, they can be delivered by remote learning. Now, when we get together with our philanthropists, or we're applying for these grants, which are contracts that are educational, when you're talking about behavioral issues, there's nothing that would solve our youth behavioral issues quicker than our psychological and spiritual reparations, because they become an irresistible proposition. Now, our youths aren't presented with an irresistible proposition when it comes to their behavioral.
Who's making these reparations? Dean, excuse me interrupting. And when you say reparations, where are those reparations coming from? Are they coming from our community, or are they coming from the community within which our youths, for example, are functioning within?
Well, there is nothing that has anything to do with African repair that can come from Europeans. They aren't qualified and they aren't concerned. So anybody looking for any form of repair as an African from Europeans is a fool. And we have plenty of them. So we only have to look at the scourge of the colonial virus and the colonial virus vaccination, which doesn't actually fit up to the dictionary definition of a vaccination, because a vaccination will preclude that you cannot take on this illness. That isn't the case. So when
they're changing the definitions to suit their needs.
Exactly. Well, just like historical revisionism, and we've seen that. Remember, we were rescued from Africa by the white man's burden, from apparently swinging on trees, which isn't congruent with the Benin bronzes that sit in the British Museum right now, 800 plus 100 years old. So we are aware that everything, as I stated with the case with the blonde lady dancing with feces, is only optics. And Europeans have mastered optics that we as Africans just haven't taken on board. And I think part of that psychological and spiritual repair has to be delivered through our propaganda, be that our news agencies, be that our filmmakers, be that our musicians. All of these cabals of creatives have a highly contributory role to play within that psychological and spiritual repair of global Africans. You only have to look at how influential American movies and music are, and the African Americans culturally have been highly influential, who are just now receiving some competition from Afrobeats artists, which again can harness the mindset of a generation. Now, when we are highly intentional about what we are distributing globally to reshape our minds, that is what we need philanthropists to start getting behind, so that global Africans can come to reflect this new shaping of our thought that is going to be beneficial to the mirroring that we create in the actual world. Because the only difference between any man or woman on this planet is how they think, and how they think is based on what they are willing to tolerate, and what they are willing to tolerate is always reflective in one's life.
Okay, terrific. Guys, look, I mean, you've led this perfectly into a segue about the second half, really, of the conversation. And what I'm going to say is that now we're going to look at the hard issues: institutionalization, the economic, the actual factors that put people in straitjackets. For example, across Africa, general GDP is down 4.1%. Average annual inflation stands at 13.5%. For a comparison, in the UK, it's 10.1%. For another comparison, in Ghana, average annual inflation is at, you're not hearing me wrong, 31.7%. Food and energy prices are rising everywhere, particularly in Africa. There's a huge fiscal deficit in that the government's earnings do not meet the government's outgoings. There are all kinds of geopolitical tensions and internal strife and conflicts. And Africa is paying a carbon tax, although she only produces 3% of the carbon footprint of the entire world. So, it's a perfect storm. Under these circumstances, things like the media become incredibly important to switch people's mentality, because when the West says, look, the whole world is burning up, our climate is going to pot, we have to pay carbon taxes and so on, and they spread these taxes more or less equally around the world, with Africa producing just a fraction of the global warming. Plus, in the days when these people were creating their wealth in the global north, nobody was talking about global taxation. Now that Africa needs the growth, of course, everyone is talking about global carbon taxation. What are we going to do without a media? Or rather, let me reframe that. What should the media do that serves African people to change people's perspectives about these narratives? Because if you follow the narratives as presented by the external media, Africa is just going to basically toe the line that's provided by the World Economic Forum and the alphabet institutions like the World Bank, WHO, the IMF, and so on and so forth. Who's going to go first?
I don't want to hog after just speaking, but because it's actually something that is quite close to my heart, in an agency that we are forming now called the Diaspora Wire. We have to have something that is comparable to Al Jazeera and RT. Even though we saw the power of global Europeans who can shut down RT from their platforms, they can't shut the messaging down from coming out globally. We have social media, we have mobile phone messaging, we have a number of ways of getting the messages out. And if it weren't for Al Jazeera, we still may be ignorant to the fact that George Bush and Tony Blair fully concocted a war for the extraction of oil from Iraq. We must have our own news gathering agencies to create parity and structural inclusion with the rest of the world. And you can't create any form of parity or structural inclusion unless you have a comparable means of doing it. And the ability to propagate and counter-propagate our people against adverse propaganda and politics coming from Western media. So let's just take the colonial virus, for instance, when 5 African leaders mysteriously died who were fully against the adoption of European so-called vaccines. Now, when we look at that, no African informed, biased, investigative journalism, we just took the Europeans' word for it, that these guys who we must now laugh at because they died of the colonial virus when they were fighting against the vaccine, and everybody laughed and everybody just took that version. But the fact that Magaluf was missing for 2 weeks, we aren't questioning now. And in lesser influential nations, such as Haiti, they openly assassinated the leader by sending special forces troops into his house. to shoot him in his bed. So we know they do it. We know that colonially nothing has changed. We know that the US and the UK protect, US, UK, and France protect and serve exactly the same interests as they did 500 years ago. And what all of this alludes to is that we are the subjects of a 500-year black experiment. Because I've noticed, Chairman Tech, how many times you've mentioned the term black. And our problem is our adoption of the black brand as Africans, because it makes us wards of the state. We're not black, we're just Africans. Just like Chinese aren't yellow, they're Chinese. Just like Asians aren't brown, they're just Asians. We are Africans. But because we've been so propagated to adopt the black branding as a byproduct of a 500-year black experiment carried out by Europeans, where we're merely the subjects and don't contribute to any factor of that experiment, the ending of that experiment is us creating a comparable news gathering agency as Al Jazeera and RT, able to not only highlight the issues of our people, but to propagate our people and others further afield.
Very good. Dean, I completely agree with you, 100%. I personally never agreed with the idea of blackness. I call us people of African origin.
Absolutely.
That is my chosen term for it. And I don't actually like the expression white either. I call them people of European origin.
And white only exists because black is maintained.
Sure.
So there would be no racial hierarchy if we weren't black.
Yeah, sure. Well, there would be, in my opinion, there would be other issues because there's a sense of normalization which is created when a certain standard is created and widely propagated by media, political and other sources. So if I come to Chioma now, who is actually in the media, what I noticed, let me flip to Chioma, just a moment. Dean, thanks so much for that. Let me flip to Chioma. Chioma, we have an issue in that people still share on Facebook, Twitter, and so on and so forth, the output of people like CNN, Al Jazeera, the BBC, the Washington Post, the UK Guardian, the UK Times, Deutsche Welle. These are all non-continental based media sources who work to a news agenda. Worse than that is the fact that actually, virtually, I would say 85% of the world's media is powered by two news sources. One is Associated Press and the other is Reuters. Now, both are very closely connected media. So what do you see as a solution to this thing? I know you and I have discussed some solutions to this, but can you share with people, your concerns about the fact that actually, if the source of your news is coming from two places, and those two places are mostly connected to each other, how can you possibly have any kind of diversity in the news?
There's actually, yeah, you're right. There is no diversity. These media houses, even the two that you're talking about, are connected at the World Economic Forum. So that's just one place. So there's one sort of global pseudo government, which has media, which has business, which has NGOs, which has governments, which has whatever. And they sit there and they decide what's going to be policy, what's going to be talked about, what's going to be pushed, even in terms of entertainment, what movies, what books, etc., etc., what they're going to give their backing. And then the media just come on board as the official like loudspeaker to just go and announce it everywhere. So they do not actually have any agenda of their own. They don't have any authenticity. They are not trustworthy in any way, shape, or form.
And isn't it extraordinary, Chioma, that, I mean, as a journo, I noticed whole chunks of text appear in the Times, the Guardian, the Telegraph, the Washington Post, the New York Times, across media. And also, when it comes to broadcast media, you get whole phrases being repeated
Yeah.
ad lib by all the channels. You
Yeah.
hear that often enough, it sinks in. But Africans are sharing those sound bites.
Because they haven't stopped to take the time to understand that they're subject to one massive PR campaign. And so because of that, they're just kind of swimming along like, everybody else. And this is the problem. And when the employees of these media houses are the people we've been discussing in the softer issues, people who are not actually stopping to take the time to understand the fact that
Yep.
there is no real liberty in Africa
Yep.
at this point in time, that
Right.
governments are compromised and that governments are not going to work for the good of the people, and that people are the ones who now have to take things forward. When you have those people as the editors, senior writers, or whatever, beat reporters, then all you're going to get is the same nonsense that's being pushed by the World Economic Forum, pushed faithfully out there.
Okay.
There's not
Can
going
I?
to be any diversity. And so
Sure.
we exist now on the fringe, those who want to now try and transform mindsets from a genuine perspective.
Okay. Can I ask you the day? I'm focusing on you at the moment, Chioma, because you're in the trade. What about the issue of shills? Every now and again, you have a few token PAO faces on the media. Dean, I heard your comment. Every now and again, you have, our PAO faces, people of African origin faces, on the media. And, they're obviously there to make people of different backgrounds feel as if, oh, you're included in the news. But often they're just shills. I don't mind mentioning there are some very big names who are also so entertaining that you forget the fact that actually this guy is a paid advocate for agents who are completely acting in a way which are antithetical to your needs. What do we do about them?
Well, we have to expose them somehow. But in as much as they do what they do, they will end up getting entangled in the same traps that their masters will also get entangled in, and they'll all get exposed.
Yeah.
But the thing is, what do we do to ensure that at least a larger percentage of the population, at least if we can get to that 20% that Anna mentioned, because I really like that number. I don't know if we'll get to 100 yet, but if we can get to that 20% of the population and help them to understand that the large majority of what they're consuming, from news to entertainment, is actually fabricated, carefully constructed programming designed to move the masses in a specific direction and get them to embrace certain policies, which brings in, the issue of, this global passport thing that they want to do with that
Yeah.
vaccine nonsense
Yeah.
and all the other stuff that they're trying to suggest to people.
Mhm.
When people start to grasp that, wait, this is one big tool, one big ominous, sinister body that is actually pushing out these messages, then if we can get those 20% awake and aware, then we can start to shift, because these 20% are in every sphere. They're in government, they're in education, they're in agriculture, they're in families, obviously. They're wherever we need them to be to start to shift things quietly or loudly. Sometimes loudly is not useful. Sometimes being Magufuli by yourself, on a stage is not helpful. It can help you get destroyed faster. It can help you get exited like Gaddafi was exited. Sometimes doing it quietly, being the wise clerk who knows how to misfile or edit a certain document and get it signed so that the policy actually changes in our favor, is more useful. And
Okay.
yes, it's the things of revolution. And so even the same thing in media. So if we can't, we have to find a way.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Daniel, you're nodding your head quite vociferously. I'm curious. A penny for your thoughts, sir.
Well, I'm loving the conversation. That's why I'm nodding my head so much, and not because of any, should we say, confirmation bias from everybody else, but it's quite elating to understand that others can also see what you can see. Because sometimes you start to feel like you're the only mad person in the zoo. You see what I'm
Right.
saying? So it's good to see that. Oh, absolutely, this is also evident to many, and it's just perhaps a lack of action. Where I will just take it to is really it's buffering up what's been said already. I think we need to start looking at things from a kind of collective point of view, and that involves two main things: collective education, yes, where we need to create systems that, if you want to call them, drip feed information onwards, to our people, who a majority of whom, if they gave them this conversation that we've just had across any African country, will not be able to understand the word that has been said here, Uncle Ted, because none of them speak the colonizers' language that, whether fortunately or unfortunately, we've been somehow privileged to be a part of, for all the benefits of what it brings us versus also how it keeps us away from the community. I do a lot of activism, direct activism work. So, and the activism is not just limited to, should we say, people of African descent, because you see, again, going back to that point of what we see with Africans is a microcosm of what the European ruling elite have been able to perfect and keep doing to their own citizens. Hence why they have that term, whether it's trailer trash or working white working class. And you see that some of these experiments start first on their own people, and then they take you on a grand institutional scale. There's an African American professor of blessed memory by the name of Dr. Amos Wilson, who I have to call here because it's very key. Because one of the things Dr. Wilson says is that if your education system is not training you to identify the solutions to your own problems, then that education system is only training you to serve somebody else's. And this is the situation we have with Africa. Right. And as come across in all the things that we're discussing. So, like Dean has said, yes, we need definitely a media organization that counters the narrative. But that media organization can only counter the narrative in the sense of reflecting our culture or even keeping us up to date with news. It also has to be able to take on the role of educating. So and that educating doesn't only exist in what we might call the framework of a school. It has to be able to diffuse in a way, much like perhaps even under Nkrumah's time when Ghana was seeking independence, or Mao, or even Shea and Fidel. We have to look at different ways at which we engage the system. Looking at something like YouTube, for instance, once upon a time, there was a lot of knowledge that people could find pertaining to the African/Black situation. And then all of a sudden, they start clamping down. So once they start to realize just how impactful something can be, which goes against their agenda, you find that, again, these things start get taken off. So we need our own autonomous spaces where we can speak our truth to power. Okay. It's very key. So we really need to look at re-education. We need to look at everything being on a kind of collective basis and a drip down, because a majority of our people, we can't depend on the middle or even the working class, because they also bought into the illusion they have something to lose. They don't realize they're part of their own problems that they're facing. Do you understand? Because an education can either miseducate you or it can give you that autonomy. And what we have with the current education systems across Africa and even here is, as we've already discussed, to perpetuate a certain victimization of ourselves.
Yeah. Okay. Look, I mean, there's a couple of other questions I'm really gagging to ask, but I shall be incredibly self-disciplined and try and close out our conversation this afternoon. I'm going to go around. It's magic wand time, and I'm going to take it from the top. Anna is the first lined up in the studio. What is the magic wand you would wave to give Africa a voice on the world stage? So what, you get to pick one item. Anna, over to you. Very quickly now.
Okay. Education. which means the word education is actually supposed to mean to look within. So you learn, but you're looking within, and that's what we've been lacking.
Okay, thank you very much. Next is Chioma, your magic wand. What is the one big thing that we all want a million things, but you have to be frugal here. You get to choose one thing that you believe would give Africans a voice on the world stage.
Self-belief in their identity. Because once you believe in who you are and you have the confidence to live it out, nothing and no one can stop you.
Absolutely. Okay. Next, I'm going to go to who's next up. I think it's Dean. Dean, your magic wand, sir.
Would be for Africans to understand that they are not separate from the land wherever we are in the world, and to have a value within that and within ourselves as Africans.
Okay, terrific. And last but not least, Dalian, you're going to close this thing out now. What is your magic wand that you would wave?
I would say a respect and a relearning of our spiritual philosophies and practices. Because nothing has proven, and it still continues to be proven today. I could list you a whole litany of things that we find within the African spiritual corpus, because the African worldview doesn't compartmentalize things. So your education isn't something that you find in school. You will find it at home. You will find it as you walk down the road. Yes. Yeah. Everything is holistic, right? And European science, now moving from empirical to the quantum, constantly keeps bringing forth African ideas as if there's something new. We need to, at the very least, whether you want to practice it or not, the same way people know of an idea such as the Big Bang, yeah, and not all of us are scientists, but we know it because it's in common parlay. Well, we should also know that there's a Congo origin story that described the Big Bang before the 1940s, when the Europeans came to kind of give that idea structure and claim it by giving it a label. That's the Congo origin story. It's the Akan origin story. It's the Dogon origin story. Yeah, and I can list so many different traditions. So the science that we value now and has been conceptualized as some kind of particular modality is actually what we find within African culture, and is expressed totally all across it. So we need to move away from this falsehood that African culture is some juju or obia or some devil worship, and actually just try to learn the principles. It's very key to us relearning about ourselves.
Okay, look, everyone, thank you so much. I'm going to bring us all back into the studio. It's been a great conversation. Thank you. We could have gone on for another hour. So I hope you can come back onto this program again. For those who are watching, this will be streamed on YouTube at Tet Kofi, if you look at the ticker at the bottom. And also on my Facebook page, which is also called Tet Kofi. And thank you very much for joining us. Please like, share, comment, particularly comment, and subscribe if you can. And for now, Anna, Chioma, Dean, and Dalian, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.